I'm Leo Thompson. I'm 18 years old, and at my own high school graduation, my adoptive father stood up in front of 400 people and publicly disowned me. Before I tell you about the secret I revealed that made his entire world crumble, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know we're all in this together. The air in the gymnasium was a character in itself, thick, sticky, and smelling of floor wax, popcorn from a forgotten game, and the cloying sweetness of 1,000 different perfumes. It was a classic scorching June day in our town, the kind of heat that makes leather seats burn and tempers fray. The school's ancient air conditioning system was groaning in protest, managing only to stir the humid air around like a thick soup. I sat on a ridiculously hard plastic chair, the cheap polyester of my graduation gown clinging uncomfortably to the back of my neck. On stage, Principal Albright was delivering a speech that was probably inspiring, but her words were getting lost in the oppressive heat and the restless shuffling of the crowd. I was just trying to breathe, counting down the names until they got to the T's. Leo Thompson. My name. The name of a son who was about to be cast out. When they finally called it, the sound was muffled, distant. A polite, scattered applause broke out from the parents. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I smoothed down the front of my gown, a useless gesture, and began the long walk toward the stage. Felt like a mile. Every step echoed on the polished floor. This was supposed to be a moment of triumph, the finish line of 13 years of education. Instead, it felt like I was walking the plank. But as my foot touched the bottom step of the stage, a single voice, sharp and imperious, sliced through the applause. Stop! The sound was so abrupt, so commanding, that the clapping died as if a switch had been flipped. 400 heads swiveled in unison. The silence that followed was deafening. It was my father, Arthur Thompson, standing bolt upright in the third row. He was a man who was always in control, and even here, in a high school gym, he radiated an aura of cold corporate power. His expensive charcoal suit was a declaration of his importance amidst a sea of pastel summer dresses and short-sleeved shirts. Beside him, my stepmother, Isabel, performed her part beautifully. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her expression a masterful blend of concern and helplessness. "Arthur, please, not here," she murmured, a stage whisper just loud enough to be heard by those around them, painting her as the reasonable peacemaker. He shrugged her hand off. His focus was entirely on me, his eyes like two chips of granite. "Leo," he announced, his voice booming with the practiced authority of a CEO addressing a boardroom. "Before you take one more step toward that diploma, I want everyone in this room to know that as of this moment, I am officially cutting off all financial support. You are on your own." A collective, audible gasp swept through the gymnasium. It was a physical thing, a wave of shock and scandal. I saw my friend Sam, just a few rows away from me, his jaw literally hanging open. On stage, Dr. Albright had frozen, her hand halfway extended for a handshake that would never come. Arthur wasn't finished. He was a man who enjoyed the grand gesture. He raised his chin, soaking in the stunned silence. "I see no reason to pay for a college fund for someone who isn't my real son anyway," he declared, letting the words echo. "I have fulfilled my legal obligation by providing food and shelter. It's time you learned what the real world is like." The phrase, "not my real son," was a bomb he'd just detonated in the middle of my life. Whispers erupted like brush fires all around the room. People were looking from his stony face to my calm one, their expressions a cocktail of pity, disgust, and morbid fascination. Isabel tugged at his sleeve again, the perfect image of a distraught wife. But here's the thing he didn't know, the thing none of them knew. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't humiliated, because I knew this was coming. I had been waiting for this exact moment. I had been planning for it. So I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, knowing curve of my lips. But in that charged silence, it was as loud as a scream. I saw the flicker of confusion, of irritation, on Arthur's face. This wasn't the broken, pleading reaction he had orchestrated. I turned my back on him, walked up the 3 steps to the podium with a calm I didn't know I possessed, and took the offered diploma from a stunned Dr. Albright. Then I turned to the microphone. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent gym. "Since we're sharing DNA secrets today." I reached into the deep inner pocket of my gown. My fingers closed around a crisp, white envelope. I pulled it out and held it up for everyone to see. From the corner of my eye, I saw Isabel's face. The carefully constructed mask of concern shattered. Her skin went a ghastly, chalky white. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. She knew. In that instant, she knew exactly what I was holding. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, you have to understand that my life wasn't born from this kind of poison. There was a time before the bitterness, before Isabel, when the house I grew up in was a home. And the heart of that home was my mom, Eleanor Thompson. Eleanor wasn't my biological mother, a fact I always knew, but she was the only real mother I ever had. She and Arthur adopted me when I was an infant, a tiny thing with no history and no one. For the first 12 years of my life, she built a world around me made of love and security. My earliest memories are sensory ones tied to her. The scent of cinnamon and yeast from the bread she baked every Saturday morning. The soft, worn-out feel of the quilt on her favorite armchair where she'd read to me for hours. Her voice creating entire worlds filled with nights and talking animals. The bright, earthy smell of the soil in her rose garden, a place she called her sanctuary. She had a gift for making you feel seen. When she listened, she truly listened. Her head tilted, her warm brown eyes focused entirely on you. I never felt like a project or a placeholder. I was just Leo, her son. Arthur was a different story. Even back then, he was more of a concept than a father. He was the provider. The man who left for the office before I woke up and came home after I was in bed, smelling of expensive cologne and the faint, metallic scent of money. He was a successful man, the CEO of a company his own father had built, and he was consumed by the idea of legacy. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, profits and losses. Our family, I think, was another asset, and I was a line item he had agreed to. He wasn't unkind, not in an active way. He was just absent, a ghost in a good suit. Eleanor was the one who made our family real. She was the one who filled the enormous, empty spaces of that house with life. She told me I was adopted on my 12th birthday. We were sitting in her garden, the late afternoon sun making everything golden. She handed me a small, leather-bound photo album. The first picture was of her and Arthur, younger and happier, holding a tiny, blanket-wrapped bundle. "Me. You didn't grow under my heart, Leo," she told me, her voice thick with emotion as she tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You grew in it. From the very first moment I saw you. Don't you ever, for 1 second, doubt that you were the most wanted child in the entire world." And I believed her. It never felt like a secret or a shame. It was just part of my story. A story that began with being chosen and loved. But that safe, warm world began to crumble when I was 14. The diagnosis was ovarian cancer. It was brutal and relentless. In a year, it stole the vibrant, laughing woman I knew and left a frail, pale stranger in her place. I spent every possible moment with her, reading her the same fantasy novels she had read to me, my voice often breaking as I tried to stay strong. Arthur's way of coping was to retreat further into the one thing he could control: his work. He treated her illness like a hostile takeover, hiring the best doctors, demanding reports and prognoses. He'd stride into her hospital room, all business, discussing treatment options while avoiding her tired, knowing eyes. He couldn't handle the vulnerability of it all, the messy, uncontrollable reality that his money and power were utterly useless against the rebellion in her cells. The day of her funeral was as gray and empty as I felt inside. Arthur stood beside me, a statue of a grieving husband. He placed a heavy, awkward hand on my shoulder, but it offered no comfort. It was a programmed gesture, the correct protocol for the situation. After the last handful of dirt was thrown, a silence fell between us that would never truly be broken. The heart of our home had stopped beating, and the house was just a house again. Big, cold, and haunted by the ghost of a love that had held it all together. The silence in that house became a presence. It had weight, filled every room, clung to the furniture. I learned to live with it, to move through it. But it didn't last. 6 months after we buried my mother, 6 months to the day, a fact that always felt like a calculated insult, Arthur announced he was getting married. Her name was Isabel. She arrived in our lives not like a person, but like an event. She was a corporate lawyer from a top firm in the city, 15 years younger than Arthur, with sharp cheekbones, sharper ambition, and a smile that was as beautiful as it was empty. Where Eleanor had been soft sunlight, Isabel was fluorescent lighting, bright, cold, and unforgiving. I tried to give her a chance. I was 15, grieving, but I understood that my dad was lonely. I hoped she might bring some life back into the house. But from our very first dinner, I felt a chill from her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She asked me questions about school and my future, but her eyes were analytical, assessing. It felt less like a conversation and more like an audit. The day she moved in, her conquest of the house began. It was a systematic purge of Eleanor. First, the photos vanished from the mantelpiece. Pictures of me and Mom on vacation, of her laughing in her garden, were replaced by sterile, abstract prints in cold silver frames. Then, the furniture started to go. The comfortable, slightly worn armchair where Mom used to read was replaced by a rigid, architectural piece of leather and chrome that looked like it belonged in a museum lobby. The final straw was the study. It had been my mom's sanctuary, filled with her books, her collection of antique maps, and the faint, lingering scent of her jasmine perfume. I came home from school one day to find Isabel directing 2 movers, pointing at boxes with a decisive flick of her wrist. My mom's entire life was being bubble-wrapped and carted away. "What are you doing?" The words came out sharper than I intended. She turned, her smile not faltering for a second. "Oh, Leo, hello. Just a little redecorating. Arthur and I agree this room has so much potential as a proper home office for me. All this clutter was just gathering dust." "That's not clutter," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I couldn't control. "Those are my mother's things." Her smile tightened infinitesimally at the edges. "Eleanor is gone, Leo," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of patronizing sympathy. "It's not healthy to live in a shrine. We have to look to the future, for the good of the family." But it was never about the future. It was about erasing the past. She was rewriting the history of that house and by extension our family. She needed to be the one and only Mrs. Thompson, not the sequel. And I, the living, breathing reminder of the first story, was a narrative problem she was determined to solve. Arthur was a willing accomplice. He was so caught up in the whirlwind of this new, exciting relationship that he saw the changes as progress. "Isn't it wonderful, Leo?" he'd say, gesturing around a living room that no longer felt like ours. "Isabel has such an eye for modern design. She's really breathing new life into this old place." He didn't see that she wasn't breathing life into it. She was embalming it. And I knew, with the chilling certainty of a character in a horror movie, that my eviction from the story was only a matter of time. The instrument of my final exile arrived about a year into their marriage. Isabel was pregnant. The change in Arthur was instantaneous and profound. It was like a light had been switched on inside a man I'd only ever known to be dark and shadowed. He glowed. He was home for dinner every single night. He'd give up weekend golf games to go shopping for cribs and strollers. I'd watch him from a distance, a spectator in my own home, as he would kneel down and press his ear against Isabel's growing belly, whispering plans and promises to the child within. One evening, he and Isabel were looking at a catalog of ridiculously expensive baby furniture. He looked over at me, where I was pretending to read a book on the couch, and his face was alight with a genuine, unfiltered joy I had never been the recipient of. "This is it, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is our second chance. A real family. A chance to get everything right from the start." His words, though not intended to be malicious, were a dagger to my heart. A real family. The implication was clear. What we had with Eleanor, what he and I had now, it was all a first draft, a failed experiment. This baby, his biological flesh and blood, was the true beginning. I was just the prologue. From that day on, I began my own strategic retreat. I used the house like a hotel, a place to sleep and occasionally eat. My real life happened outside its walls. I took on an after-school job at a local grocery store. I spent every possible hour at the library or at my friend Sam's house. Sam's family was a tornado of noise, arguments, and laughter. His mom, a warm, bustling woman named Maria, would always insist on feeding me, piling my plate high and asking about my day with a genuine interest that made my throat tighten. Being there was both a comfort and a constant, painful reminder of the warmth I no longer had. Then the baby was born. They named him Daniel. The moment Arthur held that child, a lifetime of emotional distance melted away from him. He became a doting, hands-on father. He learned to change diapers, to warm bottles, to distinguish between a cry of hunger and a cry of pain. His world, which had once revolved around stock prices and quarterly reports, now revolved around this 7-pound infant. The house was filled with conversations about Daniel's future. His trust fund, his inheritance, which prep school he'd be enrolled in. My own future, my impending graduation and college plans, became a non-topic, an awkward silence at the dinner table. It was during this time that the oddities began to stack up. Arthur's younger brother, my Uncle Gregory, became a constant presence. He was a handsome, charming man who had always been the fun uncle, but his focus on Daniel was intense. He was over at the house 3 or 4 times a week, always when Arthur was at work. He'd hold Daniel for hours, staring down at him with a fierce, possessive look that seemed out of place. The seed of suspicion was planted one afternoon when I came home early and heard Isabel in the kitchen. Her voice a tense, angry whisper on the phone. "I told you to stop," she hissed. "It's too much. The gifts, the constant visits. I told Gregory he has to back off. Arthur made a comment yesterday. He's getting suspicious about how much attention you're both giving the baby." My blood ran cold. I flattened myself against the wall in the hallway, listening. Suspicious of what? His own brother? A thought, ugly and unthinkable, began to take shape in my mind. It was a monstrous, disloyal thought, but it refused to leave. It whispered to me that the performance I was watching every day in this house was more than just a family drama. It was a conspiracy, and I was the only one who didn't have a copy of the script. That single, overheard sentence changed my role in the house from a passive observer to an active investigator. Every interaction, every conversation, was now filtered through a lens of suspicion. I started to notice things I'd previously ignored. The way Isabel and Gregory would share a look over the baby's head that lasted a fraction of a second too long. The way she would subtly relax whenever Arthur left the room and Gregory was there. I needed to talk to someone. The only person I trusted was Sam. We were in his car, a beat-up old Honda that smelled like stale pizza and air freshener, parked at our usual spot overlooking the town. I laid it all out for him, the phone call, Gregory's weird obsession, the way Arthur was being so obviously played. Sam listened patiently, scraping at a sticker on his dashboard with his thumbnail. When I finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "Dude," he said, shaking his head, "that is some next-level soap opera stuff. Are you absolutely sure? I mean, messing with your brother's wife. That's biblical level bad." "I'm not sure of anything," I admitted, the frustration making my voice tight. "That's the problem. It's all a feeling, a vibe. But it's so strong, Sam. It feels like the whole house is built on a lie and I'm the only one who can feel the shaking." "Okay, so what are you gonna do?" he asked, turning to face me. "You can't just accuse them. Your dad would crucify you. He's so wrapped up in that baby he can't see straight." "I know. I have to be smart about this," I said, more to myself than to him. "I need proof. Something real. Something they can't deny or explain away." "Just be careful, man," Sam said, his expression serious. "These are not people you want to mess with. Your stepmom's a shark of a lawyer and your dad, well, you know what he's like. They'll go scorched earth to protect their perfect little family." His warning echoed in my head. He was right. This wasn't a game. My first break came from Arthur's own paranoia. A few months after Daniel was born, he had a state-of-the-art security system installed, complete with cameras covering every angle of the house, inside and out. He was obsessed with the idea of protecting his precious heir. He had the live feed linked to his phone, but he'd also installed the monitoring software on the main family computer in the study, the room that used to be my mom's, now Isabel's command center. One Friday night, Arthur and Isabel went out for a fancy dinner with some of his business partners. It was the chance I'd been waiting for. With my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, I slipped into her office. The room was cold and impersonal, smelling faintly of her expensive perfume. I sat down in her chair and turned on the computer. It was password protected. My first few guesses, Arthur and Isabel, Daniel Thompson, were wrong. Then I tried the obvious. Daniel Legacy 2023. The screen unlocked. The arrogance was almost laughable. I found the security app and started scrolling back through days of recorded footage from the living room camera. It was painfully boring. Hours of an empty room, of Isabel walking through with the baby. Then I found it. A clip from the previous Tuesday afternoon. Arthur was at work. Gregory was over. The video showed him sitting on the couch, holding Daniel, rocking him with a practiced ease. Isabel came into the frame. She stood behind the couch, behind Gregory, and placed her hands on his shoulders, leaning down to whisper something in his ear. He leaned his head back, resting it against her stomach, and she stroked his hair. It was a moment of casual, unthinking intimacy. It was the kind of gesture you share with a partner, not a brother-in-law. They stayed like that for a full minute, a silent, secret tableau, before the sound of the garage door opening sent them springing apart like guilty teenagers. My breath caught in my throat. I fumbled for the flash drive I had in my pocket and quickly saved the clip. My hands were shaking. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a bullet. It was the first tangible piece of proof that the ugly suspicion in my mind was the truth. The camera footage was a start, but it was circumstantial. They could explain it away. A moment of shared family affection, a trick of the camera angle. I needed their own words. And once again, their own expensive technology provided the opportunity. The baby monitor they used was top of the line, a gift from one of Arthur's wealthy clients. It had a crystal-clear video feed and a microphone so sensitive you could hear the baby breathe. The main receiver sat on Isabel's bedside table, but it also had a feature she had long forgotten about. It could stream the audio feed to an app on an authorized phone. Months ago, during a brief period where she was pretending to include me, she had set it up on my phone. For the rare occasions I was asked to babysit for 10 minutes while she took a work call. She had never revoked my access. So I started listening. I felt like a creep, sitting in my room with my headphones on, eavesdropping on a nursery. Most nights, it was nothing but the soft sound of Daniel's breathing or the gentle hum of the white noise machine. I started to think it was a dead end. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, close to midnight. I was about to give up when I heard stirring from the monitor. Daniel was fussy, making small, unhappy noises. A few moments later, I heard Isabel's footsteps and saw her shadowy figure appear on the grainy night vision camera. She leaned over the crib, gently rocking it. She began to whisper to him, her voice a low, soothing murmur I had to strain to hear. "Sure, my sweet boy, it's okay," she cooed. "Mommy's here. Everything is going to be okay. We just have to be strong and patient for a little while longer." I held my breath, my finger hovering over the record button on my phone's screen. I know," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, into the conspiratorial whisper of a secret keeper. "It's hard. But Daddy Gregory is coming to see you tomorrow. He misses you so much. We just have to keep our little secret safe for a little while longer, my love. Just us. Our secret." I felt the blood drain from my face. Daddy Gregory. She had said it. The unthinkable word. The confirmation. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely press the screen, but I managed to hit record, capturing the last 30 seconds of her incriminating lullaby. It was quiet, it was whispered, but it was undeniable. Her voice, her confession. The next day, the world looked different. The secret was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. This new knowledge made me bolder. I was in the kitchen when our housekeeper, Mrs. Maria, was dusting. Mrs. Maria had been with our family since before I was born. She had adored my mother, Eleanor, and I knew from her tight-lipped silence that she despised Isabel. She was the only other person in that house who saw things as they were. She watched me as I stood staring out the window, my mind a million miles away. "You have a heavy weight on your shoulders, Leo," she said softly, her Spanish accent thick. I turned to her. "You see it too, don't you, Maria?" She stopped dusting and looked at me, her dark eyes full of a sad wisdom. She hesitated for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. She nodded toward the large walk-in closet off the main hall where she kept cleaning supplies. "Come," she whispered. Inside, tucked away on a high shelf behind a stack of old towels, was a small, exquisitely wrapped gift box from a famous downtown jewelry store. "This was delivered for her last week," Mrs. Maria said. "From Mr. Gregory. She told me to put it away, so Mr. Thompson would not see." My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a tiny, gleaming gold baby bracelet. It was beautiful. I picked it up, and my eyes fell on the engraving on the inside of the clasp. It was tiny, but unmistakable. 3 initials, DGT, Daniel Gregory Thompson. Minor twist too. I looked up at Mrs. Maria. She just gave me a single, slow nod. She was my silent witness, my unwilling accomplice. I snapped a quick, clear photo of the bracelet and the engraving with my phone. The web of their lies was not just tearing. It was shredding. With every new piece of evidence, the video, the audio, the photo of the bracelet, a cold, hard resolve was solidifying in my gut. The question was no longer if I knew the truth, but what I was going to do with it. The power I held was terrifying. It was the power to annihilate a family, to ruin lives. Was I capable of using it? Was I that person? As it turned out, I didn't have to make the decision. They made it for me. It was a rainy Thursday night, about a month before graduation. I was supposed to be at Sam's house for a study group, but it got canceled at the last minute. I came home early, letting myself in through the side door to avoid dripping water through the main foyer. As I stood in the kitchen, toweling off my hair, I heard their voices coming from the living room. Arthur and Isabel. I froze, instinctively flattening myself against the wall in the adjoining hallway, hidden by the shadows. "The timing has to be perfect," Isabel was saying, her voice a low, clinical hum. "It needs to be a clean, public break. We can't have him dragging this out, making things messy." I know, Arthur sighed. His voice was laced with a weary frustration. "It's just, Eleanor's will was very specific about the college fund. It's a substantial amount, Isabel. The trustees release it to him on his 18th birthday. And he hasn't earned it." Isabel's voice was sharp now, cutting. "Arthur, be realistic. That money is an asset. It should be redirected into Daniel's trust. For our real son's future, we have a responsibility to protect our family's primary inheritance." My stomach twisted into a knot of ice. They were talking about me, about my future, about my mother's last gift to me. "So what's the plan?" Arthur asked, his voice betraying a hint of weakness, of wanting her to take the lead. "It's simple," she said, her tone becoming confident, persuasive. "We make the announcement at his graduation ceremony. It's the perfect symbolic moment. The end of his childhood, the end of our obligation. You stand up, you state clearly that your financial support is terminated. You do it publicly in front of witnesses. Our lawyer agrees it's the strongest move. It prevents him from coming back later, claiming he was promised things. It establishes a clear legal precedent. No arguments, no emotional scenes behind closed doors. Just a clean cut. Minor twist one. I had to put a hand over my own mouth to stifle a gasp. This was a calculated, strategic execution, not a heat-of-the-moment decision. They had consulted a lawyer. They had planned to ambush me, to humiliate me on what was supposed to be one of a young person's proudest days, all as a cold financial tactic. It seems unnecessarily cruel, Isabel, Arthur muttered, and for a fleeting second, I felt a spark of hope. Don't be sentimental, Arthur, she chided, her voice turning to steel. It's what's necessary to protect what's ours. He is not your blood. You fulfilled your obligation. You gave him a home, a good education, more than he would have had otherwise. Now it's time to put your real family first. There was a long, heavy silence. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, each tick a hammer blow against my heart. You're right, Arthur said finally, his voice devoid of all doubt. You're absolutely right. It's the smart play. We'll do it at the graduation. In that moment, any last shred of hope, any lingering wisp of childish affection I held for the man who had raised me, disintegrated into ash. He was not my father. He was a hostile business partner cutting a bad investment loose. And Isabel was the ruthless lawyer advising him. They had just declared war. A war they thought was already won. As I slipped back out into the rain, a cold, terrifying clarity washed over me. My plan was no longer a vague notion of revealing the truth. It now had a date, a venue, and a righteous, burning purpose. It was no longer just about their affair. It was about my survival. It was about taking back the last thing my mother had tried to give me. It was about justice. The next 3 weeks were lived in a state of suspended animation. On the outside, I was a normal high school senior. I studied for my finals, I went to graduation rehearsals, I joked with my friends. I played the part. But on the inside, I was a different person. I was cold, focused, and methodical. The emotional, hurt teenager had been replaced by a strategist. My mission was singular. I needed the one piece of evidence that was beyond reproach, beyond denial. I needed their DNA. The process of collecting the samples was the most adrenaline-fueled experience of my life. Every move felt freighted with immense risk. I started with Arthur. He had a morning ritual. A cup of black coffee in a specific ceramic mug, which he'd drink in his study while reading the financial news. I waited until he left for a meeting, my ears straining for the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway. Then, wearing a pair of disposable gloves I'd bought from a pharmacy, I slipped into his study. The room smelled of leather and his expensive cologne. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I carefully picked up the mug from his desk, the dregs of his coffee still warm, and sealed it in a Ziploc bag. One down. Daniel's sample was almost too easy. Isabel was constantly sterilizing his things, but she was also forgetful. She left one of his used pacifiers on the kitchen island. I waited until she went upstairs to answer a call, my eyes darting around nervously. I snatched it, my gloved fingers feeling clumsy and conspicuous, and sealed it in another bag. 2 down. Gregory was the final, most difficult target. He was a variable I couldn't control. I had to wait for him to come to the house. My chance came that weekend. He stopped by on a Saturday afternoon, bringing with him his usual aura of false bonhomie. He was drinking a can of Coke. I watched that can as if it were the Holy Grail. He talked, he laughed, he played with Daniel. My hands were sweating. He took a call and walked out onto the patio, leaving the half-empty can on an end table. This was it. I walked casually through the living room, as if heading for the kitchen. In one swift, practiced motion, my hand shot out, grabbed the can, and I tucked it into the large front pocket of my hoodie. I didn't break stride. I didn't look back. I just kept walking until I was safely in my room, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. 3 down. The next step was finding a lab. I did my research online, looking for private labs that offered anonymous paternity testing for personal knowledge. No questions asked. I found one 2 towns over. I took out the cash I'd been saving for a used car. It was a mix of money from my grocery store job and the birthday money Eleanor had left for me in a trust. It felt fitting that her final gift to me would be the tool I needed to secure my future. I drove to the lab, paid in cash to leave no paper trail, and filled out the submission forms with fake names. Sample A, father. Sample B, child. Sample C, alleged father. The lab technician, a woman with tired eyes who looked like she'd seen every possible permutation of human misery, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She took my samples and my money. Results will be mailed to the P.O. box on the form in 10 to 14 business days, she said, her voice flat. And that was it. The point of no return. As I drove away from the lab, I felt a terrifying sense of finality. I had set a machine in motion, and I couldn't stop it now. All I could do was wait for the results, and for the day of reckoning to arrive. The 2 weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception. I was a model son, a diligent student. I was polite to Isabel. I asked Arthur about his day at work. I played my part in the charade so well that I think I even started to scare myself. The anger had cooled into a solid, heavy core of resolve in my stomach. Every day after school, I would drive to the post office and check the P.O. box I had rented. For 12 agonizing days, it was empty. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the samples were contaminated. Maybe the whole thing was a bust. The paranoia began to gnaw at me. Then, on the 13th day, it was there. A plain, brown, bubble-padded envelope with a typed address label. It had no return address, just a postmark from the town where the lab was. It felt strangely light in my hands, but it carried the weight of my entire future. I didn't open it at the post office. I drove to the bluff overlooking the river, the same spot where Sam and I always talked. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and just sat there for what felt like an hour, the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. It was taunting me. A war was raging inside me. Part of me, the part that still remembered a mother's love and the hope for a father's, was terrified to open it. If I was wrong, if this was all a product of my own grief and resentment, then I was the monster. I would have betrayed them all with my suspicion. But the other part of me, the part that had been forged in the cold silence of the last 4 years, knew I wasn't wrong. I had to see it. I needed the finality of it. With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. The report was a few pages long, dense with scientific terminology, charts of genetic markers and alleles. My eyes scanned frantically, skipping over the jargon, searching for the conclusion. I found it at the bottom of the second page, in clear, bold type. Regarding the paternity of Sample B, child the alleged father, Sample A Arthur, is excluded as the biological father. Probability of paternity 0%. The air left my lungs in a whoosh, as if I'd been punched. 0%. It was real. I flipped to the next page, my heart pounding against my ribs. The alleged father, Sample C, Gregory, cannot be excluded as the biological father. Probability of paternity 99.999%. There it was. The truth, stripped of all emotion, reduced to a statistical certainty. A wave of something cold and hollow washed over me. There was no joy, no triumph, just a profound, aching sadness. This piece of paper was the official death certificate for the idea of family I had clung to for so long. I carefully folded the report and slipped it into the crisp, white envelope I'd brought with me. I drove home, went straight to my room, and took the bag holding my graduation gown from the closet. I unzipped it and placed the envelope in the deep inside pocket. It rested against my chest, a cold, hard rectangle of truth. For the next 2 days, it stayed there. I could feel its weight with every move I made. At dinner that night, I watched Arthur and Isabel discuss the final arrangements for the graduation party they were throwing. A party that was meant to be my public execution. They looked at me, their inconvenient problem, and smiled. They had no idea that the judgment they were so eager to pass had already been rendered, and the sentence was waiting, sealed in an envelope, just inches from my heart. And that brings us back to the gymnasium, to the oppressive heat, the suffocating silence, and the collective stare of 400 people. As I stood at that podium, the flimsy diploma in one hand and the microphone in the other, a strange thing happened. The fear vanished. The nervous tremor in my hands ceased. A wave of absolute calm, as cold and clear as a winter morning, washed over me. This was no longer their stage. It was mine. They had written the first act of this play, but I was the one who would write the ending. I looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of confusion and curiosity. I found Sam in the crowd. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, a silent message of support that anchored me. I saw my teachers, their faces a mixture of professional concern and personal shock. Then my eyes found the third row. I locked my gaze with Arthur. The smug certainty had evaporated from his face, replaced by a dawning, confused anger. He had expected tears, pleading shame. My composure was an unscripted deviation, and it unnerved him. My father, I began, my voice steady and resonant in the microphone, is right about one thing. I am not his biological son. But that isn't the shameful secret he thinks it is. I've known my whole life that I was adopted. I paused, letting that sink in. I wanted them to understand this wasn't a revelation to me. My mother, Eleanor Thompson, I continued, speaking her name with a reverence that felt like a shield, told me when I was 12, and she taught me something that Arthur seems to have forgotten. She taught me that family isn't determined by blood. It's built on love, on loyalty, on trust, on showing up for people, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. I let my eyes drift to Arthur again. Those are values that seem to have been misplaced in our house lately. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. This was not the speech anyone was expecting. Arthur has made it abundantly clear that blood is the only thing that matters to him now, I said, my voice hardening slightly. He's so proud of his bloodline, of the Thompson legacy. He is so overjoyed to finally have a real son, his son Daniel, to carry on the family name. I let the sarcasm in the words real son hang in the air. I saw Isabel shift uncomfortably in her seat. She was no longer the picture of a concerned wife. She looked like a cornered animal. And I think it's wonderful that he's found so much joy in being a father to Daniel, I said, my voice turning syrupy sweet. It's a beautiful, sacred bond, which is why it is so critically important that he knows the whole truth about the son he cherishes so much. It was then that I raised the white envelope, holding it between my thumb and forefinger. It seems, I said, my voice dropping, forcing the crowd to go completely silent to hear me, that my father isn't the only one in his marriage who's been keeping secrets about DNA. The murmur in the crowd grew into a buzzing. Arthur's face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He looked from the envelope in my hand to Isabel's terrified face, and for the first time, the gears of suspicion began to turn in his mind. He was a brilliant businessman, a master of seeing the angles. And he was finally seeing the angle he had missed for over a year. You see, I said, leaning closer to the microphone, making my voice a conspiratorial whisper that still carried to every corner of the gym. While Arthur has been at the office, working tirelessly to provide for his family and secure their future, his wife has been working just as tirelessly on building a family of her own. I locked my eyes on Isabel. Her painted smile was gone, her lips a thin, bloodless line. Isn't that right, Isabel? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization that her carefully constructed world was about to be obliterated. This was it, the precipice, the moment before the world changed forever. With a deliberate slowness, I pulled the folded lab report from the envelope. The crinkle of the paper sounded like a gunshot in the dead-silent gymnasium. Arthur, I said, my voice softening with mock pity. That beautiful baby boy, Daniel, that you've been showing off to the world for the last 8 months? That second chance at a real family that you were so happy about? I am truly, deeply sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but he is not your son. A collective, involuntary roar of shock erupted from the crowd. It was a visceral, human sound. Arthur physically recoiled, stumbling back a step as if I had landed a physical blow. What in God's name are you talking about? He stammered, his voice a ragged whisper. I'm talking about betrayal, Arthur, I said, my voice rising, clear and sharp as glass. I'm talking about the affair that your wife, Isabel, has been having for well over a year. A sordid little secret she's been keeping. And not just with anyone, With your own brother. My Uncle Gregory. I gestured with the hand holding the report towards the guest section where Gregory and his family were sitting. 1,000 eyes swiveled to find him. He was trapped in a spotlight of shame, his face turning a blotchy, sweaty red. He looked like he was about to be sick. The baby that Isabel is passing off as your heir, I declared, my voice booming with newfound power, is your nephew Arthur, not your son. Daniel is the product of her lies and your brother's treachery. You're lying. Isabel's voice was a piercing shriek that cut through the uproar. She was on her feet now, her face contorted in a mask of rage and desperation. He's a bitter, ungrateful, adopted brat. He's making it all up because he's jealous. Am I? I asked, my voice dropping back to a lethal calm. I held up the lab report so everyone could see the official letterhead. This is a certified DNA paternity test report from a private, accredited laboratory. I had it done 13 days ago. It's amazing what you can learn from a discarded coffee mug, a used pacifier, and a half-empty soda can. I turned my full attention back to Arthur. His face had gone from disbelief to a ghastly, pale white. He was staring at Isabel, then at his brother, the terrible truth finally dawning on him. The results are quite conclusive, I said, my eyes boring into his. I read from the page, my voice ringing with the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. The probability of you, Arthur Thompson, being the biological father of the child is 0%. And the probability of your brother, Gregory Thompson, being the father. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming, is 99.999%. The silence that followed was the most profound I have ever experienced. It was a silence filled with the sound of a man's world shattering into a million pieces. And then the dam of decorum broke. Isabel let out a choked, animalistic sob. She snatched baby Daniel from her horrified mother's arms and she ran. She didn't walk. She fled, shouldering people aside, a desperate fugitive escaping the scene of her crime. Gregory, for his part, tried to make a discreet exit, but his own sister, my Aunt Carol, who was sitting next to him, grabbed his arm. Her face was a mask of utter disgust as she screamed, "How could you? How could you do this to our family?" And Arthur just collapsed. He didn't faint. His legs just gave out, and he crumpled back into his chair like a building being demolished. He stared forward, his eyes vacant, his mouth hanging slightly open. The powerful, untouchable CEO, the king of his own universe, was dethroned and broken before an audience of 400. I stood on that stage, the piece of paper that had changed everything still clutched in my hand, and I watched the dynasty burn. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt the crushing weight on my chest finally begin to lift. This was the moment everything changed, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You have no idea how much it means. If you could do me a huge favor and like this video and drop a number 1 in the comments below, it lets me know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It tells me that my experiences matter to someone out there. Your support is the biggest reason I have the strength to share the rest of what happened. The rest of the graduation ceremony was, for all intents and purposes, over. Dr. Albright, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly, stepped up to the microphone after I walked off the stage. She mumbled a few flustered sentences about an unforeseen family emergency and announced that diplomas could be picked up from the school office starting the next day. It was a mercy killing for an event that was already dead. The gym descended into organized chaos. The air buzzed with frantic, hushed conversations. People were trying to leave as quickly as possible, but not before casting shocked, pitying, or morbidly curious glances towards the wreckage of the Thompson family. No one approached me directly. It was like I had an invisible force field around me. I was the boy who had detonated a nuclear bomb. What do you say to someone like that? A few of my classmates shot me wide-eyed, impressed looks from a distance. My friend Sam was the only one who broke the barrier. He came up, threw a solid arm around my shoulder, and just said, "Leo, holy hell, man." It was all that was needed. I watched as my Aunt Carol, her face a mess of tears and fury, tried to help Arthur to his feet. He moved like a very old man, shuffling, his eyes still locked on some distant, horrifying point in space. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. I wasn't his son anymore. I was his executioner. I didn't go home. I couldn't bear the thought of setting foot in that house of lies ever again. I went straight to Sam's place. His parents, Maria and David, were waiting. The news had already started to spread through the town's hyper-efficient gossip network. Maria took one look at my face, pulled me into a fierce, motherly hug that smelled of garlic and laundry detergent, and just held me for a full minute. David shook my hand firmly and said, "You have a place here as long as you need it." They didn't ask for details. They just gave me shelter. The story became the stuff of local legend within hours. The fall of the House of Thompson. My phone was a constant barrage of notifications. Texts from people I barely knew, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I turned it off. Sam told me the rest. Isabel had completely vanished. She and Daniel were gone by the time Arthur made it home. She had cleaned out their primary joint bank account and disappeared into the wind, leaving a legal mess in her wake. Gregory had gone to ground, issuing a statement through an expensive lawyer that called my claims the malicious and unfounded fantasies of a troubled young man. But the truth had its own momentum. His wife filed for divorce the next day. Several of his key business partners began quietly distancing themselves. The perfect, powerful family, a pillar of our community, had imploded in the most public way imaginable. And I, the adopted outcast, the ghost they tried to erase, was the one holding the detonator. I spent the next few days on Sam's lumpy but welcoming couch, caught in a strange limbo between relief and emptiness. The war was over. I had won. But winning felt a lot like being left alone in a field of rubble. A week later, a number I didn't recognize flashed on my phone screen. I had been ignoring most calls, but a gut feeling told me to answer this one. "Hello." There was a pause, then a ragged, unfamiliar voice. "Leo." It was Arthur. He sounded like a stranger. "What do you want?" My voice was flat, devoid of the anger I thought I'd feel. I was just tired. I need to see you," he said. "There are things, papers to sign. Your mother's, the college fund. The trustees contacted me. Can you come to the house?" Against my better judgment and Sam's strenuous objections, I agreed. I needed closure. I needed to get the last of my things and walk away for good. When I walked through the front door of that house for the last time, it felt like entering a tomb. The air was stale and heavy. The curtains were all drawn, casting the grand foyer in a gloomy twilight. The pristine tidiness of Isabel's reign was gone, replaced by a thin layer of dust and neglect. Empty takeout containers and a half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the marble kitchen island. Arthur was in the living room, sitting in the dark. He was still wearing the same rumpled suit from the graduation. He looked like he hadn't slept or eaten in a week. He didn't stand up as I entered. He just stared at me, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Was it all true, Leo?" he asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Every word." "You know it was," I said. He nodded slowly, a barely perceptible movement. "She called me, the night she left, screaming, admitted it all." He let out a dry, rattling sound that might have been a laugh. "She said she never loved me. She said she married me for the lifestyle, for the security. She wanted a child, and when the doctors said it was unlikely for me, she saw an easier solution. My own brother." He looked up at me then, his face a pathetic mask of self-pity and confusion. "But why, Leo? Why did you do it that way? So public, so brutal. You could have just come to me." That was it. The spark of my old anger finally ignited. "Come to you," I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. The same man who was planning, with his lawyer, to publicly disown me and steal the last thing my mother left me? The same man who called me a bad investment behind my back? "You don't get to ask me for discretion, Arthur. You set the rules of engagement. You made it a public spectacle. I just delivered a better show." The truth of my words hit him with the force of a physical slap. He flinched and looked away, shamefaced. He had no defense. There was nothing he could say. "I'm here for my things," I said, my voice cold and final. "Then you'll never have to see me again." "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice small. "College," I said, turning my back on him. "I got the Miller Scholarship. A full ride based on academic merit. Turns out I don't need your money or your name to build a future. I'll do it on my own." I walked up the grand staircase, packed a duffel bag with the few things that mattered, and walked back down. He hadn't moved. He was just a broken man sitting alone in a dark, empty monument to his own foolishness. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. 2 years. It sounds like a long time, but it passes in a blur of late-night study sessions, cheap coffee, and the constant low-level anxiety of being a broke college student. I had moved 300 miles away to attend the state university. The scholarship covered my tuition and fees, but everything else was on me. I worked 2, sometimes 3, part-time jobs to make it work. Stocking shelves at the campus bookstore, waiting tables at a greasy spoon diner on weekends, and picking up odd tutoring gigs. My life was a carefully balanced equation of classes, work hours, and sleep. I lived in a noisy off-campus apartment with 2 other guys, and my diet consisted mostly of instant ramen and whatever was on sale at the grocery store. It was hard. It was exhausting. And it was the most profoundly liberating experience of my life. For the first time, I was the sole architect of my existence. Every dollar in my pocket was a dollar I had earned. Every grade on my transcript was a grade I had worked for. My life was small and unglamorous, but it was real, and it was mine. The sense of pride that came with that independence was something Arthur's money could never have bought. I chose psychology as my major. Felt like an obvious choice. After growing up in a psychological labyrinth of manipulation and denial, I wanted to understand the wiring of the human mind. I wanted to know what made people do the things they do, what broke them, and what, if anything, could put them back together. I made friends. Real friends who knew me as just Leo, the guy from their stats class, not the Thompson kid from the scandal. I even started dating a girl from my sociology program. A smart, funny woman named Clara who had a laugh that could make you forget all the ugliness in the world. I was slowly, painstakingly building a new life, a new identity, one that had nothing to do with my past. I kept in close contact with Sam, who would call me every Sunday night with updates from home. He was my lifeline to a world I had left behind but couldn't entirely escape. He told me that the fallout from my graduation day had been catastrophic and lasting. Arthur had sold Thompson Industries, the company his father had built and that he had dedicated his life to. The scandal had made him a pariah in the tight-knit business community. The promotion to the national board he had been angling for had evaporated. He had cashed out and retreated from public life, a wealthy hermit rattling around in a house full of ghosts. He had lost the one thing he valued more than anything, his legacy. Isabel had eventually surfaced in California. There had been a bitter, ugly legal battle fought through lawyers. She had won primary custody of Daniel, along with a hefty child support settlement. Gregory, after a ruinous divorce that had cost him his house and half his assets, had moved to another state, a disgraced man who could never outrun the story of his betrayal. I listened to these updates with a strange sense of detachment. It was like hearing about the fates of characters in a book I had read a long time ago. The raw, searing pain of it all had cooled into a scar. It was a part of me, but it no longer hurt to the touch. I was moving on. I was, against all odds, healing. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, a letter arrived, forwarded from Sam's parents' address. The envelope was made of thick, expensive cream-colored paper. The handwriting on the front was shaky and unfamiliar, but I recognized the embossed return address. It was from Arthur. My first instinct was to throw it in the trash. But curiosity, a stronger and more persistent emotion, won out. I opened it. The note inside was short, just 3 sentences written in a spidery, uncertain hand. Leo, I have been in therapy for the past year. I am beginning to understand many things. I know I don't deserve it, but I am asking if you would be willing to meet me. I read it over and over. A part of me screamed that it was a trap, another manipulation. But another, quieter voice wondered if it was possible for a person to truly change. I held that letter for a week, torn, before I finally made a decision. I chose a neutral location. A nondescript chain restaurant off the highway, exactly halfway between my new life and my old one. I got there first and chose a booth in the back, a strategic position where I could see the entrance. When Arthur walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The man I remembered was a pillar of arrogant strength, always in a perfectly tailored suit, his shoulders squared, his presence commanding a room. The man who walked through the door looked diminished. He was thinner, his expensive polo shirt hanging loosely on his frame. His hair was almost completely gray, and the confident stride had been replaced by a hesitant, uncertain shuffle. He looked his age for the first time. The first few minutes of our meeting were painfully awkward. We ordered coffee we didn't drink. We stared at the laminated menus as if they held the secrets of the universe. He was the one who finally broke the silence. "Thank you for coming, Leo," he said, his voice raspy. "It means more than you know." "I'm here," I said, my voice non-committal. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "You said you wanted to talk." He nodded, taking a shaky sip of his coffee. "My therapist," he began. "She has me doing a lot of writing, trying to understand my own history, my relationship with my own father. He was a hard man. He taught me that love was conditional, that respect was earned through success. Weakness was unacceptable." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding. "I was a terrible father to you, Leo, because I never really learned how to be a son." I stayed silent, letting him talk. I was so consumed with this idea of blood, of legacy, of continuing the Thompson name. He continued, his voice cracking. "I saw your mother's love for you, how easy and unconditional it was, and a part of me was jealous. It was a bond one didn't know how to form. After she died, instead of trying to build that bond with you, I ran from it. I let Isabel and my own ego and my own damn pride poison everything that was left of our family." He finally looked me straight in the eye. "I am sorry," he said, and the words were raw, unvarnished. "For everything. For the years of neglect. For what I planned to do at your graduation. For being a coward when I should have been a father. There are no excuses." We sat in silence for a long moment. He then told me the final, ugly detail of the story. "Gregory and I finally spoke," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He confessed everything. It wasn't just about Isabel. It went back decades. He always resented me. He claimed our father always favored me, that I got the bigger share of the family business, the easier path. He saw Isabel as a vulnerability, a way to wound me in the one place I couldn't control. He wanted to tear down everything I had built. His affair wasn't about love or passion. It was about destroying my life's work, my inheritance. Daniel was just collateral damage in his long war against me." Hearing it laid out like that, so cold and pathetic, something inside me finally broke. Not in a sad way, but in a way that lets the light in. The anger, the resentment I had been carrying for so long, suddenly felt pointless. It was like carrying a bag of heavy rocks for no reason. "I forgive you," I said. The words surprised me as much as they did him. He looked up, his eyes wide with shock. "Leo, after everything, you don't have to say that." "I know," I said, a small, genuine smile touching my lips for the first time. "The forgiveness isn't a gift for you, Arthur. It's for me. I'm done letting you and your ghosts live rent-free in my head. I'm letting it go." A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. He didn't try to wipe it away. He just nodded, a broken man finally accepting the grace he didn't deserve. That day, in a cheap diner off the interstate, a father and son who had never really been either of those things to each other finally had an honest conversation. That meeting was 2 years ago. Our relationship didn't magically fix itself overnight. There was no movie-ending hug. But it was a beginning, a fragile, tentative start. Today, my life is good in a way I never thought possible. I finished my degree and now work as a counselor at a youth center, helping kids who are navigating the chaos of broken homes and difficult family lives. My salary isn't going to make me rich, but I go home every night feeling like I made a small difference in the world. It feels like the best way to honor the memory of Eleanor, by trying to be the kind of stable, caring adult for others that she was for me. I'm with Clara, and we're building a life together based on honesty and mutual respect, the two things my childhood lacked. Arthur and I have dinner once a month. It's a quiet affair, usually at the same diner where we had our first real conversation. He's a different man now. The therapy has softened his hard edges. He's quieter, a better listener. He asks about my work, about Clara, and he seems to genuinely care about the answers. He sold the big, empty house and lives in a smaller condo. He donates a lot of his time and money to charities, especially those for adopted children. He's trying to atone. We're not a perfect family. We'll never be. The scars are too deep. But we are building something new from the rubble. A relationship based not on obligation or blood, but on a shared, painful history and the tentative hope for a better future. I learned some hard lessons from all of this. I learned that family isn't a noun. It's a verb. It's not about who you're born to. It's about who shows up, who listens, who loves you without condition. My family is Sam and his parents who gave me a home when I had none. It's Clara who sees me for who I am now, not who I was. But the most important lesson, the one that I carry with me every day, is about the nature of revenge. For a long time, I thought revenge was that moment on the stage, the glorious cinematic destruction of my enemies. But that moment, as satisfying as it was, left me feeling hollow. The real revenge wasn't in their destruction. The real revenge is in my survival. It's in my happiness. It's in the peaceful, meaningful, and honest life I have built for myself, brick by painful brick. It's refusing to let their poison continue to flow through my veins. The best revenge is not giving them the satisfaction of having ruined you. It's living well. And by that measure, I have my revenge every single day. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it connected with you in some way. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it felt like the whole world was against you? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more stories, please consider liking this video and subscribe.